She said it looks better on her, Dana whispered, touching my mother's necklace. My necklace, while smiling at her own reflection. I hadn't been home 24 hours. My savings were drained, my clients were jumping ship. And now the woman I once called my best friend was living in my bedroom, wearing my dead mother's heirloom like a trophy. Eric didn't even flinch, just poured wine into my glass and said, "It's our place now." But the lease says otherwise. I may have walked into a trap, but I kept receipts. Every single one. They moved into my life like I'd never return. They forgot I built this life myself, one contract, one client, one plan at a time. And they're about to learn what happens when a paper trail becomes a weapon. My name is Lauren Whitaker, and I'm 45 years old. I've built my marketing consultancy from scratch, securing clients through methodical preparation, while my husband Eric drifts between part-time jobs. My best friend Dana helps manage my home life when I travel, though lately her jokes about practically living here make my shoulders tense. The bitter airport coffee and rolling suitcase wheels have become as familiar as the jasmine diffuser I keep in our apartment entryway. Before each trip, I review my perfectly organized files, lease agreements, bank statements, client contracts, all meticulously labeled and backed up. Eric calls it obsessive, but I learned early that documentation keeps chaos at bay. The morning I left for my month-long business trip overseas, I triple-checked every lock, though something felt off about Dana's goodbye hug. But let me start from the beginning. I wheeled my suitcase down the familiar hallway of my apartment building, already tasting the comfort of home after a month away. The wheels clattered against the worn carpet runner, the same steady rhythm that had accompanied countless business trips over the years. You know that feeling when you're almost home, when your shoulders start to drop and your travel-tight muscles begin to unwind? That's where I was, right up until I reached my living room threshold. The first wrong note hit my nose. A cloying, cheap perfume that had no business in my carefully scented home. I'd always kept a jasmine diffuser by the entryway, but this smell was different. Department store dramatic, the kind Dana wore when we first met, before I convinced her to try something subtler. My hand froze on the suitcase handle. There, draped over my office chair like some kind of victory flag, was Dana's silk scarf, the one I'd given her for her birthday last year. I remembered the way her eyes had lit up when she opened it, how she'd promised to treasure it. Now it hung there, carelessly tossed aside in my space, marking territory that wasn't hers to claim. The living room told its own story of invasion. Our throw pillows, arranged just so when I left, lay scattered and dented with unfamiliar patterns of use. In the kitchen sink, 2 wine glasses stood like guilty witnesses. The TV screen glowed with a paused playlist I'd never created, full of songs I didn't recognize. Have you ever had that moment when your brain refuses to process what your eyes are seeing? When reality shifts just enough to make you question everything you thought you knew? I moved through my apartment like a detective at a crime scene, cataloging every detail that screamed something was wrong. My fingers reached out to touch Dana's scarf, needing physical confirmation. The silk slid between my fingers, definitely the one I'd chosen so carefully. Definitely not supposed to be here. My throat tightened as if the silk had wound itself around my neck. Footsteps in the corridor pulled me from my inventory of betrayal. A soft knock followed, tentative but insistent. Through the peephole, I saw Mrs. Jacobs from across the hall, her usual warm smile replaced with concern. I opened the door, struggling to keep my face neutral. "Lauren, dear," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper as she leaned closer. "I've been waiting for you to get back." She glanced over her shoulder before continuing. "There's been, shouting, coming from your apartment, almost every night for weeks now." The floor seemed to tilt beneath my sensible heels. Mrs. Jacobs had lived across from us for 6 years, had watered my plants during shorter trips, had never once complained about anything. The look in her eyes now, part pity, part worry, made my stomach clench. I thanked her with what little voice I could muster and closed the door. The bedroom would have answers, had to have answers. but the half-closed door at the end of the hallway looked like a mouth poised to tell a lie, and for a moment I couldn't make myself move toward it. The cheap perfume followed me down the hallway, a sickly sweet reminder that someone else had been living in my carefully ordered world. My necklace, a delicate silver chain my mother had given me, lay coiled on the hallway console table instead of in its proper jewelry box. Another piece of evidence in a case I hadn't known I'd need to build. Remember how I mentioned my obsession with documentation, with keeping everything in its proper place? Standing there in my violated home, I felt a cold clarity settle over me. Every out-of-place item, every borrowed space, every stolen moment would become evidence. But first, I had to face whatever waited behind that bedroom door. I pushed the bedroom door open and time froze. You know that moment in disaster movies when the hero first sees the tornado bearing down? That's what it felt like. Except my tornado had scattered intimacies across my bedroom like shrapnel. Dana's designer toiletries crowded my dresser, her expensive creams and serums arranged in a display that screamed permanence. The sight of her signature cardigan, Robin's egg blue cashmere that I'd helped her pick out last Christmas, draped across my carefully chosen quilt, made my fingers twitch. But it was the stack of mail on the nightstand that turned my blood to ice water. Envelopes addressed to both Eric and Dana, casual as you please, like they belonged there, like this was their space now. Have you ever noticed how shock can make you methodical? There I was, standing in the wreckage of my marriage, and all I could think was, document everything. My phone came out of my pocket like I was starting just another client audit. Click, Dana's cosmetics empire on my grandmother's cherry wood dresser. Click, the pile of mail with today's dates, proof they weren't just visiting. Click, the shared closet rod bowing under the weight of her designer wardrobe mixed with his, hangers I'd never bought holding clothes that didn't belong. You learn things running your own business, handling client crises, that cold, clinical calm that settles in when everything's falling apart. It's like muscle memory now. The nausea churning in my stomach got boxed up and filed away for later. Right then, I needed clear eyes and steady hands. I stepped back into the hallway, nearly bumping into Mrs. Jacobs, who'd followed me like a worried shadow. Her hand fluttered to her throat as she whispered. The shouting. It usually ended with someone slamming the door. Then there'd be laughing. She paused, worrying at her cardigan button. I wanted to call you, but I didn't have your overseas number. My mind clicked through possibilities like spreadsheet cells. Where would Eric be? When cornered, he always retreated to the same place, our kitchen, where he kept his liquid courage and practiced his bravado. Some men hide in garages or offices. My husband chose cabinets full of expensive whiskey I'd paid for. I pulled up my phone's recording app, muscle memory again. 20 years of client meetings had taught me, when you need the truth, get it in their own words. The soft beep of the recording starting felt like arming myself. Through the apartment, I could hear glass clinking, cabinet doors opening and closing. A familiar voice, the one that used to say, I love you, hummed off-key, completely unaware I was home. My heels made no sound on the hardwood as I moved toward the kitchen archway, rehearsing a single question over and over in my head. Who moved in? 3 words, simple enough to answer, impossible to dodge. The kind of question that would force either a clean lie or a messy truth. The kind that would give me what I needed, one way or another. The cabinet shut with a soft thump as I reached the archway. Eric's humming drifted through the air, the same tune he used to sing while making Sunday breakfast. Amazing how something so familiar could suddenly sound like a stranger's voice. I squared my shoulders, phone recording in my pocket. I'd faced down boardrooms and saved failing campaigns. I'd built something from nothing. Now I just had to stand still and let my husband hang himself with his own words. I stepped into the kitchen, and there he was, Eric, braced against the granite counter like it was holding him up. A bottle of my best Cabernet sweated between 2 glasses that didn't match. One was from our wedding set. The other? I recognized the delicate rim from Dana's housewarming party 3 years ago. You ever notice how the biggest moments in life seem to move in slow motion? Like time itself is giving you a chance to memorize every detail before it all changes? Nice of you to keep the place running while I was gone, I said, my voice steady as a metronome. Eric's eyes dropped to the floor, suddenly fascinated by the grout lines between the tiles. I could almost see him counting them. Anything to avoid looking at me. Dana's scarf is on my office chair, I continued, ticking off items like a grocery list. Her mail's on the nightstand. Her toothbrush is in my master bathroom. Each word landed like a stone in still water, ripples of tension spreading through the kitchen air. The silence stretched until I thought it might snap. Then Eric smiled. Not the warm grin I'd fallen for 20 years ago, but something new. Something that belonged to a stranger wearing my husband's face. It's our place now, he said, reaching for one of the wine glasses. You're gone too much. Our place. 2 words that told me everything I needed to know. No apology, no shame, not even a hint of regret. Just our. A plural possessive that carved me right out of the equation. Where's Dana? I asked, though the running shower down the hall had already answered that question. Eric shrugged, casual as if he was telling me about a roommate's schedule. Getting cleaned up. We had a late lunch. The way he said, "we," made my stomach clench, but my hands stayed steady. Crisis mode was fully engaged now, and I had evidence to collect. I pulled out my phone, making sure he saw the recording screen. Let me get this straight, I said, voice clear for the microphone. You just said, and I quote, "It's our place now. Is that right?" His smirk widened like he was accepting a challenge. That's right. Interesting theory, I said, letting professional calm coat each word. Because this apartment isn't shared property, Eric. Never has been. He laughed, actually laughed, and took a long sip of my wine. Check the marriage certificate, Lauren. What's yours is mine. That laugh did something to me. Not the breaking kind of something, the strengthening kind. The kind that reminds you exactly who you are and what you're capable of. I turned away from him, heading for the hallway, where my safe sat hidden behind a bland landscape print. Inside, in a blue plastic sleeve, was a single sheet of paper. That was about to become the most powerful weapon in my arsenal. You see, some people collect shoes, or stamps, or vintage wines. Me? I collect documentation. Every contract, every receipt, every legal document, all filed and preserved like prehistoric insects in amber. Eric used to tease me about it, called it my paper security blanket. My fingers didn't shake as I spun the combination. They didn't shake as I pulled out the sleeve. And they definitely didn't shake as I thought about what that lease would say, what I knew it would say, because I'd insisted on it back when we first moved in. The sound of the shower cut off down the hall. Dana would be out soon, ready to play her role in whatever fantasy they'd built while I was away. But that was fine. Let her come. Some revelations deserve an audience. I held that blue sleeve like it was made of gold, because in a way, it was. 1 sheet of paper with the power to turn their little coup into a spectacular backfire, if it still said what I remembered it saying. If my name still stood alone on that dotted line, exactly the way I'd planned it. The safe's dial clicked under my fingers, left to 14, right past 28, left again to 7. Numbers I'd chosen because they matched the date Eric proposed. Funny how sentiment sneaks into even the most practical choices. Inside, my documentation library sat in precise rows: taxes, insurance, property records, and there, the blue sleeve holding our lease agreement. The pages inside were crisp, preserved like pressed flowers in their plastic sanctuary. I slid the document out, and my eyes went straight to the tenant details. Lauren Whitaker, I read aloud, savoring each syllable. No other names, no addendums, no joint tenancy provisions. Just me, sole resident, and responsible party, exactly as I'd arranged it 5 years ago. The memory surfaced like a Polaroid developing. Mr. Peterson, the building manager, leaning over his desk with reading glasses perched on his nose. Now, Ms. Whitaker, I need to be clear. This is a strict no subletting property. Any occupants not listed on the lease need written consent from management. Violations void the rental agreement. I'd nodded, thinking it was just standard bureaucracy. Now, it felt like prophecy. My phone camera clicked as I captured the relevant clause, the sound sharp in the quiet hallway. The email went straight to my personal account. Always back up the backup. That's what 20 years in business teaches you. Walking back to the living room, I found Eric sprawled on my couch, wineglass dangling from his fingers like he owned the place. The irony would have been funny if it hadn't made me sick. The lease is in my name only, I said, holding up the document. No subletting allowed without written consent. Management's going to be really interested in our little arrangement here. Eric's laugh bounced off the walls, hollow and theatrical. Oh, come on, Lauren. More paper theater? That's always been your thing, hasn't it? Filing everything away like it actually matters. It matters now, I started to say, but my phone lit up with a string of notifications, banking alerts. My stomach dropped as I opened the app. The joint savings account, the one I'd been feeding for years with careful deposits and calculated transfers, was hemorrhaging money. Multiple withdrawals, each labeled household expenses in neat digital rows. 5,000 here, 3,000 there, 8,000 yesterday. Stop the transfers, I said, my voice tight. Right now, Eric. He took another sip of wine, casual as a cat in the sun. That money's supporting who actually shows up, Lauren. Who's here? Who makes this place a home while you're jetting off to your precious clients? The balance stared back at me. $12,137.22, down from nearly $60,000 just a month ago. Each number felt like a small betrayal, adding up to one massive wound. A hollow wind seemed to whistle through the apartment, though all the windows were closed. The same chill I'd felt at the airport, now grown into full-blown winter. I wrapped my arms around myself, clutching the lease like a shield. Lawyer. I needed a lawyer. First thing tomorrow, The gleam of metal caught my eye. Something on the coffee table I hadn't noticed before. Something that made my blood run colder than any bank balance could. My mother's necklace. The delicate silver chain with its tiny sapphire pendant, passed down through 3 generations. I'd left it locked in my jewelry box, or so I thought. But there it lay, carelessly tossed aside like costume jewelry, bearing a smudge of Dana's signature coral lipstick on the clasp. Morning hit like a hangover, even though I hadn't touched a drop. My phone buzzed with 2 emails that made my stomach clench harder than any wine could. Remember those moments when you're so tired, you have to read something 3 times before it sinks in? That was me, squinting at messages from Parker Development and Blue Ridge Foods, clients I'd nurtured for nearly a decade, both expressing concerns about my current capacity and personal situation. You know that feeling when you're in an elevator and it drops too fast? That's what hit me as I connected the dots. I pulled up the company Slack channels, scrolling through conversations I'd missed during my trip. There it was, Dana, sweet as saccharine, messaging Jenny, my junior project manager. Lauren's taking extended personal time to sort through some things. I'm helping coordinate while she's dealing with her situation. Just ping me if you need anything. My fingers trembled as I took screenshots. Timestamp after timestamp, message after message. Dana, positioning herself as my impromptu assistant. Eric, dropping casual comments in client calls about how I'd checked out and abandoned everything. The betrayal wasn't just personal anymore. They were trying to poison my professional well. I remembered the jasmine diffuser I'd bought for my office last spring, how its subtle scent had made long workdays feel more civilized. Now the thought of that carefully cultivated atmosphere being invaded by their lies made me want to throw up. Thomas Chen's law office smelled like leather and coffee when I arrived at 11. He listened without interrupting as I laid out the situation, my documentation spread across his desk like evidence at a crime scene. The divorce filing will trigger discovery, he said, tapping his pen against a legal pad. And that's where timing becomes critical. Your marital funds and business income. They're already starting to intertwine in ways that could get expensive to untangle. I shifted on the edge of the plastic chair, feeling the weight of my reputation, 10 years of careful networking and delivered promises, wobble like a spinning plate about to crash. How bad could it get? I asked, though I already knew the answer would hurt. Thomas's eyes were kind but direct. If we don't contain this quickly, Eric could claim he's entitled to a portion of your future business earnings, arguing he supported your career growth. And these client relationships, they're undermining? That damage could extend well beyond the divorce settlement. The afternoon blurred into a marathon of damage control. I drafted carefully worded emails to clients, threading the needle between professional reassurance and too much personal detail. Every check-in call I scheduled felt like plugging another hole in a leaking dam, slowing the rumor spread, but not stopping it completely. My banking app might as well have been a countdown timer. The savings balance ticked closer to $10,000, the threshold where our account would start incurring penalties. Each notification felt like another small defeat. Remember when you were a kid and you'd build something with blocks, watching it get taller and taller until that moment when you could feel it starting to sway? That's how my life felt right then. Everything I'd built was wobbling, and I couldn't steady all the pieces at once. I was still at my desk at 4, reviewing Thomas's preliminary paperwork, when I heard it, the apartment door opening, followed by that familiar humming. Dana's voice carrying down the hallway like it belonged there. The same tune she used to hum during our weekend brunches, when I thought we were friends sharing mimosas and secrets. Now it felt like a burglar's whistle, casual and mocking. My hand froze over the papers. In the sudden quiet, I could hear her heels on the hardwood, coming closer. The sound of someone who thought they owned the place. My place. They'd taken my home, were draining my savings, and now they were trying to dismantle my business. The momentum was shifting against me, and I needed to decide, right now, if I was going to let it sweep me away or find a way to turn the tide. Dana's footsteps stopped just outside my office door. 3 days after my first meeting with Thomas, I was back in his office, watching him flip through my preliminary documentation. The late afternoon sun slanted through his blinds, casting prison bar shadows across his desk. Ever notice how time seems to slow down when you're waiting for bad news? "I'll be direct," Thomas said, setting down the folder. "We're on a brutal timeline here. The court's backed up, but we've got a hearing slot in 6 weeks. That's our make or break moment." I gripped the armrests of my chair. 6 weeks isn't much time. "It gets tighter," he warned. "We need temporary orders before then for the apartment and financial protection. But here's the real crunch. I need every scrap of documentation within 10 days, or we lose serious leverage." My stomach clenched. 10 days to compile evidence of a life being dismantled. "What exactly do you need?" He handed me a checklist that felt heavy as lead. Bank statements going back 18 months, certified lease copies, witness statements about their cohabitation, credit card records, email threads, the works. He tapped the paper. Missing any deadline kills our momentum. You know that moment when reality hits you like a slap? That was mine. I pulled a sticky note from his desk holder and wrote the dates in red ink, each number feeling like another grain in an hourglass, starting to run. Back home, I pinned that note above my desk. The dates stared down at me like a countdown to doomsday. I started pulling bank statements, watching our once healthy balance shrink with each withdrawal they'd made. The margin for error was vanishing faster than summer rain on hot pavement. Remember when you could just sleep off your problems? Those days were gone. I tossed and turned, spreadsheets dancing behind my eyelids. My phone buzzed at 3 a.m., Eric, of course. "We should handle this amicably," his text read. "Split everything 50-50, clean break. You're only making it harder by fighting." Amicable. Right. Like they'd been so amicable moving into my home, draining my accounts, poisoning my client relationships. His version of amicable looked an awful lot like surrender. I texted back one word. No. The next evening, Mrs. Jacobs came by with her statement about the nightly shouting. Her hands shook as she signed it, but her voice was steel. "I'll notarize it first thing tomorrow," she promised. "Those two, they shouldn't get away with this." I spent hours after she left cataloging expenses: rent, utilities, legal retainer, groceries. The numbers blurred together as midnight approached. The margins were so tight they squeaked. One unexpected bill could sink me. The laptop screen swam before my eyes. I needed aspirin, the good stuff I kept in the bathroom cabinet. As I stepped into the hallway, I heard water running. Then Dana's voice, humming that same tune, like this was all some kind of game. I was about to retreat when something caught my eye in the mirror. A flash of gold against her throat. My chest went cold. That delicate chain. Those tiny linked roses. My mother's necklace. The one she'd worn through chemo, then pressed into my hands on her last good day. "Something pretty," she'd whispered, "to remind you you're stronger than you think." Dana turned, saw me in the mirror, and smiled. Actually smiled. "Oh, hey," she said, touching the necklace. "I hope you don't mind. It was just sitting in your jewelry box, and it looks so much better on me." The air froze in my lungs. They'd taken my home, my savings, my professional reputation. And now this piece of my mother, this memory I could hold. I stood there, unable to move, watching Dana adjust the chain like it belonged to her. Like everything here belonged to her. You ever have a moment where the world just stops? Where something so cruel happens that your brain can't process it right away? That's what hit me, standing there in that hallway, staring at my mother's necklace around Dana's throat. She adjusted it in the mirror, those delicate gold roses catching the bathroom light. "It really does look better here, don't you think?" She smiled that same smile I'd seen at countless coffee dates, the one I'd thought meant friendship. "It was just sitting in your jewelry box, collecting dust." My legs went weak. You know that feeling when you're about to faint and the edges of your vision get fuzzy? That's what happened. I stumbled back to my bedroom, our bedroom, my bedroom, whatever it was now, and sat heavily on the edge of the mattress. The fight drained out of me like water through a crack. All those careful plans, all those documented betrayals, all those legal strategies. What was the point? They'd already won. They'd taken over my space so completely that even the air felt foreign. I pressed my hand against my chest where that necklace should have been. Mom had worn it through every chemo session, telling me the roses reminded her to bloom anyway. "Something pretty," she'd said, clasping it around my neck that last time, her fingers cool and sure despite everything. "To remind you, you're stronger than you think." But I didn't feel strong. I felt hollow, scraped out, defeated. Maybe this was what giving up felt like. This quiet, empty acceptance. I could walk away, couldn't I? Find a smaller place, rebuild my client base, start over without the daily knife twists of seeing them here, touching my things, living my life. The taste of iron filled my mouth, and for a second I thought I'd bitten my tongue. But no, it was just shame, bitter and metallic, coating my throat like old pennies. A soft knock pulled me back. Mrs. Jacobs stood in the doorway, holding a steel thermos, her eyes sharp and knowing. Without a word, she stepped in and closed the door. "Drink this," she said, unscrewing the cap, and pouring something that smelled like her special Ceylon blend into the cup lid. "It's not as good as whiskey, but it's better for thinking." I took it, letting the warmth seep into my palms. The familiar scent brought back Sunday afternoons in her apartment, sharing cookies and complaints about the building's ancient heating system. Simple things, normal things, things from before. "My brother Thomas," she said after a while, settling into my reading chair. "He used to practice, you know. 40 years in family law before he retired." She watched me over the rim of her own cup. "He's got nothing but time these days, just putters around his garden. Drives me crazy with all his legal stories." I nodded, not really listening, just letting the tea warm me from the inside out. The clock on my nightstand ticked past midnight, each click another second of this strange, suspended moment. Mrs. Jacobs didn't push. She just sat there, this quiet sentinel in her sensible cardigan, while I drifted. At some point, I must have laid down, still fully dressed, the empty teacup balanced on my stomach. "Sleep," she said, taking the cup. Things have a way of looking different in the morning. I closed my eyes, too exhausted to argue. The last thing I remember was her pulling a throw blanket over me, her movements careful and precise, like she was tucking in a child. Dawn came too soon, gray light seeping around my blinds. I blinked, disoriented, still in yesterday's clothes. For a moment, I couldn't remember why I felt so heavy, so drained. Then it all rushed back. Dana, the necklace, that crushing defeat. From the kitchen came the soft clink of cups, the familiar whistle of my kettle. Mrs. Jacobs must have come back, I thought, pushing myself up. But when I opened my bedroom door, it wasn't Mrs. Jacobs at my counter. A tall man in pressed khakis stood there, measuring coffee into my French press with practiced motions. He turned at my footsteps, and I saw Mrs. Jacobs's eyes in his face, the same steady, knowing look. "You must be Lauren," he said, pouring the water in slow, precise circles. "I'm Thomas, Helen's brother. She mentioned you might need some clarity this morning." His voice had that measured tone I recognized from my own client meetings, the kind that says, "I've seen worse and I've fixed worse." I nodded, grateful for the familiar smell of good coffee filling my kitchen. "Shall we?" He gestured to the table where a leather portfolio already lay open, sticky notes marking clean white pages. As I sat, he placed a steaming cup in front of me. "Now tell me facts. Just facts. We'll get to feelings when they're relevant to documentation." I took a sip, letting the coffee ground me. Then I started with the lease, pulling up photos on my phone. "Solo tenant. My name only. Building policy requires written consent for any overnight guests beyond 2 weeks." Thomas nodded, his pen moving steadily. "Timestamps on the neighbor complaints?" 3 weeks of consistent noise. Mrs. Jacobs, your sister, has dates and approximate times. I scrolled through my gallery. I've got photos of mail addressed. To both of them, dated last week. Their toiletries, clothes, evidence they've been living here. Bank records? Joint savings depleted through multiple withdrawals labeled household. I've got screenshots of each transaction. He made another note. "And your clients?" 2 have expressed concerns about my focus. I can trace the timing to conversations with Eric and Dana. I've saved the emails and documented call logs. Thomas set his pen down and folded his hands. "You're organized. That helps." He tapped the portfolio. "Here's what we're going to do. We'll thread these elements together: the lease violation, unauthorized occupancy, financial records, and professional interference. It creates a clean narrative of systematic exploitation." The word systematic hit home. That's exactly what it had been. Not just emotional betrayal, but a calculated takeover. "Your immediate priority," Thomas continued, "is to maintain absolute calm. Document everything. If they host gatherings, record who attends. Note what they move, what they use, even how often they run the dishwasher. Build the picture of unauthorized residency." I thought of the wine glasses in the sink, the playlists on the TV. They're planning some kind of dinner party tonight. Eric called it a victory dinner when he was talking to Dana. Thomas's eyebrows lifted slightly. "Perfect. Attend if invited. If not, observe. Note every guest, every toast, every suggestion of permanent occupancy." For the first time in weeks, I felt something besides panic, a cool, steady purpose. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about execution. I spent the afternoon organizing files into Thomas's system. Each photo, each bank record, each email found its place in a sequence that told our story without a single emotional word needed. The facts spoke loudly enough. Evening brought the clinking of glasses and the murmur of voices from my dining room. I stood in the shadows of the hallway, phone recording as Eric and Dana played host and hostess to 6 of my friends. Dana sat at the head of my table, wearing my mother's necklace like a crown. To fresh starts, someone called out, and glasses lifted. And to making space for what matters, Dana added, her laugh carrying that strange new edge I was learning to recognize. I kept recording as Eric stood, swirling his wine with practiced flair. "Since we're all here," he said, "I might as well share the good news. The final papers are being filed next week." More cheers, more toasts. I stayed still, letting my phone capture every word, every name, every moment they thought they were celebrating their victory. Looking back, I think, that's when everything shifted. Standing there in my own hallway, watching them play house with my life, I felt something crystallize inside me. This wasn't about hurt anymore. This wasn't about betrayal or loss or even anger. This was about justice. And thanks to Thomas, I finally knew exactly how to get it. Eric raised his glass one more time. "To final papers," he declared, "and new beginnings." Thomas spread the documents across his kitchen table like we were plotting a military campaign. "Authentication matters," he said, tapping the lease copy. "Every page needs the building manager's stamp and signature." I'd already called her. Coming at 2 today, she's bringing the policy manual sections on unauthorized occupancy. You know that feeling when puzzle pieces start clicking together? That's what those morning sessions felt like. Each document we added made our case stronger, cleaner. "Email headers," Thomas muttered, sliding on his reading glasses. "Show me how you traced those client rumors." I pulled up my laptop. "See the timestamp on Eric's message to Sarah Collins? Now look at Dana's text to the project manager, sent exactly 12 minutes later." I pointed to the matching language about my abandonment issues. They coordinated their story. Remember how I said I was always organized? Turns out my obsession with saving everything, every receipt, every message, wasn't just anxiety after all. Thomas nodded slowly, adding the printouts to our growing stack. "Bank statements next. Show me the pattern." I spread out 3 months of transactions. Here's where it starts. Restaurant charges for 2 at places I've never been. Hotel room service bills while I was overseas. My finger traced the steady drain of our savings. All labeled as household expenses in the transfers. "Excellent," Thomas said. "This ties directly to unauthorized cohabitation." Mrs. Jacobs came by at noon with her statement about the nightly disturbances. 3 weeks of shouting," she said as we stood at Thomas's counter. "Always ending with that door slam around 11. Her hands were steady as she signed in front of the notary Thomas had arranged. I spent the afternoon time-stamping photos. Dana's mail on the nightstand, her toiletries crowding my bathroom counter, her clothes taking over my closet space. Each image got labeled and dated, building our timeline of their gradual takeover. "Your affidavit needs to be absolutely precise," Thomas reminded me. "Travel dates, client meetings, who had keys and when." I kept it short and clear. When I left, Eric had the only spare key. When I returned, Dana had moved in. Simple facts, no emotion. Around 6, I started checking off our final prep list. 3 copies of everything, organized in labeled folders. Post-it flags marking key passages in the lease and policy manual. Bank statements highlighted to show the pattern of withdrawals. My phone buzzed with client responses to my update email. Sarah Collins. "Thanks for keeping us in the loop. See you next Tuesday." Marcus at the tech firm. "All good here. Looking forward to the meeting." Small. Victories, but they meant something. The rumors weren't winning. Back in my apartment, and yes, it was still mine, I laid out my navy blazer, the one I wore for big presentations, the one that made me feel bulletproof. My exhibit folders stood like sentries on the desk, spines labeled in clean black ink. For the first time since I'd walked in on their little coup, everything felt ordered, controlled. The chaos they'd tried to create was boxed and labeled and ready to be exposed. I set my alarm for 5 a.m. and actually slept. No staring at the ceiling, no replaying their smirks, no imagining worst-case scenarios. Just quiet, steady breathing, and the knowledge that we were ready. The alarm chimed in the pre-dawn dark. I showered, dried my hair, and put on the blazer. Each button felt like clicking a piece of armor into place. Down the hall, Eric's whistling drifted through the walls, some happy little tune that probably matched his confidence. He had no idea what was waiting in those folders. No clue that his household expenses had built our case instead of his future. I checked my briefcase one last time. Folders, sticky notes, spare pens, bottle of water. Everything in its place, every detail accounted for. Thomas's words from yesterday echoed in my head. Let the evidence speak. It's telling your story better than anger ever could. Eric's whistling got louder as he passed my door. I straightened my blazer, picked up my briefcase, and took a deep breath. It was time to let the facts do their work. You ever notice how courthouse hallways smell like lemon cleaner trying to cover old coffee? That's what hit me first as Thomas and I walked through security. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, making everything look harsh and washed out. I signed in at a desk where a clerk barely looked up from her monitor. My signature was steady. Funny how your hand can be calm even when your chest feels like it's full of angry bees. Deep breaths, Thomas murmured, adjusting his tie. Remember, we let the evidence do the heavy lifting. That's when I heard Eric's laugh bouncing off the institutional beige walls. He and Dana were sprawled on a wooden bench like they were waiting for a table at our favorite restaurant. Well, my former favorite restaurant. Dana had her legs crossed, one heel bouncing lazily, wearing a cream blouse that I recognized from my own closet. The sight of it made my jaw clench, but I forced my face to stay neutral. You know that trick where you count to 4 while breathing? 1, 2, 3, 4 in, hold, then out? I did that 3 times while Thomas checked his watch and gathered our folders. The courtroom itself was smaller than I'd expected, more like a conference room with delusions of grandeur. The judge, a woman with silver-streaked hair and reading glasses on a chain, was flipping through manila folders with mechanical efficiency. Eric's lawyer stood first, young guy, expensive suit, the kind who practiced his courtroom voice in the shower. He launched into this story about a workaholic wife who abandoned her domestic duties and a lonely husband who found emotional support in a time of neglect. I watched the judge's pen move across her legal pad, waiting for our turn. The whole time he talked, I kept my eyes on that pen. Each scratch of ink meant another claim we'd need to counter with hard evidence. Thomas had drilled this into me. Let them paint their picture. Our documents will frame it properly. When the judge called my name, I stood like I was facing a crucial client presentation. Lauren Whitaker, Your Honor. Current residence 1242 Maple Street, apartment 4B. Married 8 years, separated 6 weeks. The questions came fast after that. Eric's lawyer tried every trick to make me snap, suggesting I'd abandoned Eric for work, implying my travel schedule meant I didn't value marriage. But Thomas had prepared me well. When they asked about time away, I gave exact dates and client contracts. When they pushed about emotional distance, I cited phone logs and text timestamps. No accusations, no emotional words, just calendar entries and documented facts. And you claim Mr. Whitaker permitted unauthorized occupancy? The judge asked, peering over those reading glasses. Yes, Your Honor. I placed our first exhibit on the lectern. These are date-stamped photographs showing Ms. Dana Mitchell's mail, personal belongings, and toiletries in my apartment, beginning 3 weeks into my business trip. The judge leaned forward, adjusting her glasses. Ms. Whitaker, who exactly held legal authority to grant residence rights during your absence? There it was, the pivot point Thomas had warned me about. Get this wrong, and Eric's household decisions argument could gain traction. I glanced at Thomas, who gave me the slightest nod. I pulled out the building lease and management policy, both highlighted in yellow. According to Section 8.3 of my lease agreement, Your Honor, only the primary tenant, myself, can authorize new occupants. And here, I slid the management policy forward, is the explicit prohibition against subletting or unauthorized cohabitation without written consent from both the primary tenant and building management. I could practically hear Eric's smirk fade behind me. Dana's heel stopped its bouncing. I held up the lease agreement, my finger under Section 8.3. The primary tenant, defined here as Lauren Whitaker, maintains sole authority over occupancy rights. My voice stayed level. Thank God for all those client presentations. Additionally, Your Honor, the building's management policy explicitly states that any cohabitation arrangements require written approval from both the primary tenant and building management. Thomas handed me the next folder, and I pulled out the photos I'd taken that first day back. These images were taken on March 15th at 2:47 p.m., exactly 32 days into my business trip. I laid them out one by one. Here's Dana Mitchell's toiletries on my dresser, here's her cardigan on my bed, and this, I placed the final photo, shows a stack of mail addressed to both Eric Whitaker and Dana Mitchell at my address. The judge studied each photo, her pen making small, precise notes. And the timestamps on these photos? They're embedded in the digital metadata, Your Honor. The building's security cameras can also confirm my arrival time that day. You could have heard a paperclip drop in that courtroom. Even the clerk had stopped typing. Moving to financial evidence, I continued, pulling out the bank statements. These are records from our joint savings account. Note the pattern of transfers labeled household, beginning February 12th. I pointed to the first entry. Each withdrawal corresponds to charges at local restaurants and delivery services, all during my documented absence. The judge's eyes narrowed at the statements. Total amount withdrawn? $27,412 over 38 days, Your Honor. A small sound came from Eric's direction, something between a cough and a choke. Next came the emails. This thread shows Ms. Mitchell representing herself as my assistant to Jenkins & Associates, a client of 5 years. I handed over the printed screenshots. She redirected their quarterly review meeting, claiming I had authorized her to handle it. This resulted in the temporary loss of a $50,000 annual contract. The air in the courtroom had changed. You know that moment when you can feel the momentum shift? It was like watching dominoes fall, each piece of evidence, clicking perfectly into place. I rested my hands on the lectern, waited 3 seconds, then said, "I have no further documentation to present, Your Honor." Eric's lawyer jumped up so fast he knocked his pen off the table. "Your Honor, these documents lack proper context. My client was merely maintaining the household in his wife's extended absence. As for Ms. Mitchell's presence, she was providing emotional support to—" "Counselor," the judge interrupted, lowering her glasses. "I believe I have sufficient context." She turned back to me. "Ms. Whitaker, one final question regarding access to the apartment. Did you at any point surrender your keys or authorize their duplication?" "No, Your Honor. I retained sole possession of my keys throughout my business trip. The building manager, Mr. Rodriguez, can confirm that no additional keys were requested or approved during this period. The only spare set remains in his office, logged and sealed, as per building policy." The judge closed the folder in front of her and reached for a fresh legal pad. The scratch of her pen against paper felt like it was writing directly on my nerves. She adjusted her glasses one final time and folded her hands on the bench. The clock on the wall ticked so loudly it seemed to echo. My blazer suddenly felt too warm, but I kept my spine straight and my breathing steady. Through the corner of my eye, I could see Dana's hand gripping Eric's arm, her knuckles white against his dark suit sleeve. The judge cleared her throat and began, "Having reviewed the evidence presented," the judge's voice filled the courtroom with careful precision. "Having reviewed the evidence presented, this court finds clear violations of lease terms and building policy regarding unauthorized occupancy." She looked directly at Eric and Dana. "The defendants, Eric Whitaker and Dana Mitchell, are hereby ordered to vacate the premises at 742 Maple Avenue, Apartment 3B, within 72 hours. Building management will be notified to enforce this eviction order effective immediately." My shoulders relaxed for the first time in weeks, but she wasn't finished. "Furthermore, regarding the financial matters," the judge consulted her notes. "Mr. Whitaker is ordered to repay all withdrawn funds totaling $27,412 to the joint account. Payments will begin next month on the 1st, with minimum monthly installments of $2,000 until the balance is restored. She fixed Eric with a stern look. You will also reimburse all court filing costs within the same schedule. Eric's face had gone from red to pale, but the judge was already turning her attention to Dana, who had started fidgeting with her purse strap. As for Ms. Mitchell's misrepresentation as Ms. Whitaker's assistant, the judge's tone cooled several degrees. This court will refer this matter to the Marketing Association Ethics Board for review. Such deceptive conduct affecting established business relationships warrants professional censure. The clerk will prepare the necessary documentation. Dana's mouth opened and closed without sound. You know that moment when someone realizes they've burned not just a bridge, but their own safety net? That was written all over her face. This court is adjourned. The gavel crack echoed like a punctuation mark. Thomas gathered our folders while I stood there, letting it sink in. We'd done it. Every single piece of evidence had landed exactly where it needed to. Out in the hallway, the clerk handed me forms to sign. My signature felt stronger than it had in weeks. Through the corner of my eye, I could see Eric backing Dana against a wall, his whispers sharp enough to carry. You said this would work, he hissed. Your whole plan about establishing residency. Don't you dare blame me, Dana shot back, but her voice shook. You're the one who kept taking money. Both of you need to clear the area, a bailiff interrupted, and they scattered like spooked cats. Thomas touched my elbow. Need a ride home? I shook my head. I think I'll walk, clear my head. The evening air felt different somehow, lighter, cleaner. I took the long way home, past the coffee shop where I used to meet Dana for weekly catch-ups. Funny how places can hold memories until suddenly they don't anymore. My apartment building stood quiet against the sunset. Mr. Rodriguez nodded from his office door. Congratulations, Ms. Whitaker. I've already changed the locks. Upstairs, I hung my blazer and opened the safe behind my closet panel. The velvet box sat exactly where I'd left it, untouched, since I'd discovered its contents missing from my jewelry drawer. Inside, my mother's necklace caught the fading light. Dana must have returned it when she realized the court date was set. I lifted the chain and settled it against my collarbone where it belonged. The familiar weight felt like coming home. In the kitchen, I brewed coffee and adjusted my jasmine diffuser, the same one I'd bought the day I signed the lease. The scent had always meant security to me. Still did. The balcony doors opened onto a perfect spring evening. I settled into my chair, coffee warming my hands, and watched the city lights blink on one by one. No more shouting from my living room. No more stolen funds or borrowed identity. Just the clean, quiet satisfaction of justice served without a single raised voice. I touched the necklace again and smiled. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even. It's about standing still while karma does the work. That's the thing about people who take what isn't theirs. They forget that borrowed power has an expiration date. I sipped my coffee and let out a long breath. You can't steal what isn't yours, I murmured to the evening air. The words tasted like victory.